Stranger Things Season 4 Volume 2 dropped just last week, and I have never wanted to talk about something more. This season does a lot of stuff really well, and it does a lot of stuff not so well also. This show very clearly wants us to view this season as two separate pieces, and I actually don't really hate the idea of that. In fact, I even think for a show like this, it's an amazing way to keep the hype going strong for a way longer period of time than you ever could by dropping an entire season all at once, then slithering back into the shadows for another 2 years like they and a lot of other shows often do. But with this format, you've kind of got to make sure that each one is able to stand on their own very well. And you've also got to make sure that A, part 1 is enticing, engaging, and ends with the viewer desperately needing to come back for the next part, and B, the second part needs to deliver on that excitement. It needs to act on those promises and make that wait feel earned. So for this video, we're going to mostly break it up into two parts, with the first part being Volume 1, consisting of the first 7 episodes ending with the Vecna reveal and Nancy in the Upside Down, and the second part being those following 2 long-ass episodes in Volume 2 that act as Season 4's ending. Quick disclaimer, if you're like me and you spent the last few weeks reading and listening to every single review, analysis, prediction, and theory regarding the first volume and you're really not interested in hearing about that stuff anymore, then skip to this timestamp here. I won't be offended. At this point in time, I primarily want to hear people's thoughts on Volume 2 as well. But the first volume still has plenty to talk about, and I personally would prefer it if you stuck around to listen to both. Anyways, remember to like and subscribe and enjoy my analysis on the 4th season of Stranger Things, one that pretty much proves axiomatically that popular consensus regarding media really doesn't mean jack shit. Now back to the video. With a month plus between releases, Part 1 had to act as its own separate entity, and as such, had to hold up to the expectations and scrutiny that a regular season of television would be held to. So did it? I think so. It had its flaws, don't worry, we'll talk about those shortly, but largely this first part is quite good. I could and will say exactly why, but the main thing I think I decided around episode 3 or 4 was that I just really wanted to keep watching it. I kinda went into this season watch as a job. 1 episode every night for a week was my plan. Instead, I ended up finishing it in 2 days because it was so compelling and super easy to binge, which is a mystery show with likable characters at its best. So let's start with Part 1's strengths, and as a side note, I will essentially be giving this section as if Part 2 hadn't even come out yet, mostly to keep this analysis as confined to Part 1 as possible, and partly because I had to write and record this before Part 2 actually did come out. That's kinda just how this thing works, sorry. It's what allowed me to get this video out in such a timely fashion. Anyways, first of all, the horror. They nailed this element, maybe even more so than they did in Season 1, which is probably the only time you'll ever hear me say Stranger Things did something better in a later season than they did in the first one. Vecna's design is immaculate, and his theme with the clock is haunting. I didn't entirely love his voice for some reason. I just found it kinda cartoonish, and not in a fun way, but in a way that just slightly undercut his scariness each time. But the rest is great. The tension those scenes build are wonderful, and it gives the entire show that edge of your seat fear throughout. They also used Vecna well, introducing us to the concept of him almost instantly, but then not really using or showing him to us too quickly. A weird critique I do have is that once we finally did see him in all his glory, which was a wonderfully handled moment, the following episode kinda shows him off too much. Never for long periods of time, but we do get quick scenes looking in on him in the mansion or just wandering around, and it kinda lets us get more comfortable and familiar with him. Once you reveal the monster, it's not just fair game. Limit the screen time, up the unease. I personally would have liked to keep him a bit more unknown and mythical for a while longer, because the rest of the show paces out his presence and the information we get about him absolutely excellently. Which brings us to another thing this volume did really well, the ending. The ending of that final episode is by far the most I've ever wanted to be able to keep watching this season, which is perfect. No one who finished Volume 1 isn't going to come back and watch Volume 2, but I bet the same can't be said for people who tuned out around episode 2 or 3, but we'll get to that later. The info dump at the end was earned and genuinely very interesting. They introduced us to new characters in this season really well, and giving us almost no clear indications that any of them would be connected only served to strengthen our shock when it was finally revealed. And the way they did that info dump was great. Voiceover of 1 talking to 11 while Nancy is wandering around the Upside Down, trapped and all alone. It was super visceral and eerie, and seeing the fear on Nancy's face grow as we learn more and more was a great idea that was executed really well. The performances in this season, like almost always, are pretty darn good too. At worst, characters are just doing a fine, more than serviceable job, but so many of them are killing it. The actors who portray Eleven, Nancy, Steve, Max, Dustin, as well as Eddie and 1/Vecna are doing a top tier job. Like I said, none of them are bad whatsoever, but these guys seem to have really brought it to another level here. Obviously, the biggest standout for most people is Sadie Sink as Max, and although I've always thought she was doing a good job this season, I did kinda think her hype was a bit overblown. Until I rewatched Season 3 immediately after 4, that is. I forgot entirely what Max was like before this season. She was chipper, funny, energetic, she was sarcastic too, and still very much the same character, but she is carrying that loss and hurt and emptiness so goddamn well in season 4 that I forgot she wasn't always like that. Seeing her joking around, smiling, and laughing in season 3 genuinely gave me chills, and I now will happily concede that, yeah, Sadie Sink is doing a phenomenal job. Give her all the awards, now, or we're gonna riot. The dialogue is good, the 80s nostalgia is what I would call at a very manageable and pleasant level, the outfits the cast is in, specifically Max's jacket, are cool and iconic, and the sets look wonderful. Although the CGI is shaky at times, you can tell the majority of that insane $30 million per episode budget was going into the sets and the practical effects. Did you know Vecna was entirely wardrobe and makeup? Give them an award too, holy Christ. Another thing I like is that the Easter eggs and foreshadowing are handled well for a show of this magnitude. If you try to cram in 5,000 things like, say, WandaVision sort of did, then fans can eventually become disappointed that their unrealistic expectations weren't met. And although you can mostly blame the fans for getting carried away, sometimes shows are to blame too, where they frame every single new development or slight mystery as something that's going to come with massive payoff. It is important to have these clues and Easter eggs though, especially when there's a break in releases. It keeps the fans engaged, and things like the therapist's clock necklace, and Dustin rolling an 11, and them eventually needing a 20, and getting it to win in D&D, which is 11 plus 9, to represent that 11 needs the other 9 characters in order for them to win, was quite fun. But alright, now a bit of the bad, and I'll try to keep it a bit short because there aren't a plethora of problems with this season, but rather the stuff that didn't work simply really didn't work. There's 3 big issues for me: the pacing, the locations, and the characters. And for all 3 of those, it's certain characters and certain locations, and pacing at times. The locations kind of affect the pacing though, so let's start there. Hawkins is cool. Almost everything going on in Hawkins is fine to great, even when it's a bit weird or odd, like the town manhunt being orchestrated by a smooth-talking high school student. I have my problems with the Russia stuff and the facility stuff, but let's start with the one we're all thinking of: Lenora. Lenora sucks ass. It's boring, uninspired, and worst of all, useless, which is a word you're going to hear me use again here in just a little bit. It feels so out of place, and once the season moves away from Lenora, with Elle going off to the research facility and the gang trying to track her down, it just makes it feel even odder. What did showing us Elle getting bullied for 3 episodes really tell the audience? Why did they think that mattered at all? Why did they waste such valuable screen time on it? Part of you is relieved when it seems like the Angela school shit is over with, but then the other part eventually goes, wait, why the fuck did they even bother with this? I could easily spend an ungodly amount of time just going into why I hate this bullying stuff so much in particular, but I'll just try to touch on it briefly here before moving on. Basically, Elle is already used to being different, so we didn't need to see it here yet again, whether for new information or to reinforce anything we weren't already sure of. When Mike arrives, she has no reason to lie to him, especially because last season had that whole thing where she breaks up with Mike for lying. Mike even says he's always been bullied, which is obviously true, so why would she feel like he'd like her less or something if she was also? Did she just not want him to worry? Plus, if you're gonna make up friends, why would you name the one who hates and bullies you the most? Speaking of which, I know I didn't grow up in the 80s, and although I am pretty darn confident it was much worse back then than it was in the early 2010s when I was in school, but kids are not this mean. I'm sorry, not all of them. I know teens are prone to mob behavior, so something like most of the kids doing something like laughing, particularly the popular kids, can influence others to do the same, but there is no way every single kid in the roller rink would laugh at Elle like that. That scene was horrible and had no point in existing. The scene was actively trying to convince us that Lenora is a town made up exclusively of sociopaths, right down to the DJ who seems to take great joy in declining to help Mike. And then they cap it off with Elle finally standing up for herself, and they use that to try to make her seem like some sort of monster? Because she hit a girl with a roller skate who deserved far, far worse. If Elle regained her powers and popped that girl's brain from inside her own skull, I still would have thought she got off easy. But then the cops come, arrest her, take her to holding, and then transfer her to jail, all without even notifying a parent or guardian? The police interrogating her treat her like she bombed a nursery, lit a cigarette, and cackled while watching it burn down. Not like a scared 15-year-old girl who at worst lost her temper for a moment and went a bit overboard. Even though no she didn't, fuck Angela, I hope you see her death on screen, she's worse than Ramsey. With slight tweaks, this arc could have set it up, but really nothing that happens here further justifies or heightens Elle's need to regain her powers, which also happens in quite a silly way. We could have just had a dumb moment where she looks into a mirror or something and realizes she needs her powers back in order to protect herself or something, but no, if they meant for this arc to reinforce Elle's need for her powers back, they failed. And I'm sorry, but Elle being literally recruited by government people to come and save Hawkins is not Stranger Things to me. Stranger Things is about normal kids getting tangled up in abnormal situations and figuring out how to survive with their wits and ingenuity. Now, I know Elle isn't exactly normal, and I also could see them having far more nefarious purposes than just her regaining her powers and saving the town, but this is how it's presented to us. Like Elle is a legit superhero on the government's payroll. I don't know, it just leaves a gross taste in my mouth. When she gets pulled over and taken to the diner, it just makes us as an audience go, oh fuck, okay, that's why that entire arrest part felt so goddamn weird. So we could get to this point. The research facility is mostly fine. I like getting more backstory for Elle, and it's usually pretty interesting, the highlights being the stuff involving One, and really getting to see some of the more cruel and sadistic measures they took with the kids. Which is another thing this season does really well, mostly in regards to the Russia stuff. Speaking of Russia, let's get into Hopper's whole arc, and by extension Joyce and Murray, and we'll start with them. Joyce's inclusion in this show feels a lot like if Ozark sprinkled in scenes following around Eleanor's first few days in The Good Place. What is she still doing here? She's boring as fuck, disconnected from the main plot, connected to a side plot. I cannot stress enough how fundamentally boring and useless it really is, and they even brought Murray along. Why? Oh, because we already like him, that's why. And frankly, he provides the necessary plot armor to make Joyce breaking Hopper out of a high-security Russian prison not a sentence you say after getting a cartoon concussion when your eyes are X's and there are birds circling around you. I guess now we should talk about Hopper, one of this season's main stories. Following a character who, this show, has done absolutely nothing to prove to us that he deserved to live. His arc in this season is fun. I'm a sucker for a few tropes, and one of them is a prison arc. Make it in a ruthless, snow-covered hellscape in communist Russia, and yeah, I'm on board. But why the goddamn shit did he live? What purpose does his existence now bring us? His death at the end of season 3 had some impact, and I love that his story and his growth, specifically in regards to Elle and Joyce, went unfinished. I love that shit. I've written that shit. Not every character has a natural and wonderful little ending with a bunch of nicely tied ribbons attached to it. It's kind of why I think the ending of Parks and Rec is only a 9.9 out of 10 and not perfect. It's silly to think every single character we follow is going to have their dream ending. It can be implied, but if you show each and every one of them, it just starts to feel a bit unrealistic. Anyways, Hopper, prison, yikes. Now, how is this arc fun and still boring and useless? Well, the pacing. This arc fucking drags, man. My god. When they were about to fight the Demigorgon, holy hell, like 9 times that scene would start and it would convince us that this was when we were gonna see it, then it would cut back to Hawkins. Oh shit, their last meal, fight's coming soon. Oh wait, what's going on with Nancy? Oh, Hopper's got a lighter, man, they're set. Oh wait, let's check in on Mike's tank top again. They're grabbing weapons. That beast be gargling. It's coming, it's time. Back to the superhero facility. Now, I might be over-exaggerating a touch, but the impression this all gave was that this arc was well aware of its lack of depth and really had to try to stretch it out so it's somewhat aligned with the other action in America. Joyce and Murray should not be able to sneak in and smuggle out a prisoner who is seemingly monitored more than anyone else. I know there's precedent from last season's finale, but knowing Russian and being familiar with karate shouldn't have turned Murray into the Winter Soldier. Beating up Yuri was one thing, and it was played for laughs a bit, and it kinda worked since it's believable that Yuri is a very lackluster combatant, but droves of armed, trained prison guards on their home turf? This arc felt like the show just really wanted Hopper back because he's a fan favorite, and then it gave them something to do with Joyce, and oh hey, here's Murray, you guys liked him too, right? It undercuts a lot of the overall tension too, because now we've got some rock-solid confirmation that the main characters really aren't in danger of dying. This show has killed off 3 of our somewhat main characters, the ones that we're remotely supposed to care about, and I think it's no surprise it's 3 of the least developed and least important ones. Sorry Barb, you were also unimportant and underdeveloped, but they never tried to convince us that you weren't, so you get a bit of a pass. No, I don't need Max to have died inside Vecna. But wouldn't it have been wild if she had have? Wouldn't it have upped the tension significantly and reminded us that this is a horror show where a bunch of little kids shouldn't be, and aren't, invincible? But back to Russia, and how did this deal with Antonov get initiated in the first place? Corrupt prison guard ain't exactly a new trope, but usually we get to see how it started and all that. We're just supposed to believe Antonov maybe half wants to help this guy, but mostly just wants a somewhat reasonable amount of money? And he's willing to risk an insane amount for that. $20,000 odd after some kind of deal is worked out with Yuri's percentage? He's got a fucking family, for Christ's sake. You could have ham-fisted in some stakes or reasons for his decision/betrayal of his position in country, but no, nothing. Just like with Ellen and Lenora, a cheap one-off scene could have easily justified things a lot better, but no, they couldn't even give us that. And then when he gets caught and thrown into the prison he used to guard, one of literally the worst things imaginable for any human on Earth, he's just like pretty damn chill about it. He's wildly okay with this death sentence, and it kind of makes both his character and the prison itself into a bit of a joke. That was very negative, I'm sorry. I did like this volume quite a bit actually, because Hawkins was always great, and then Russia and the research facility were at least seldom boring or useless, It was just Lenora and Joyce's arc that really crushed the pacing, but even they did have their moments too. But okay, now the good stuff. The reason most of you are watching this, to hear my thoughts on the second volume of the 4th season, something I was extremely excited for and thought this show did a wonderful job of building anticipation for, regardless of any and all faults and flaws. And it was... holy hell, was it ever underwhelming and disappointing. I'm sorry, I really am. Well, I mean, I'm not that sorry. If this part was great and executed really well, I'd sing its praises to the moon and back. So the fact that I have to spend the next X amount of minutes being largely negative is on them. It's not bad. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it was brutal or it ruined the entire show or even season or that it was an absolute slog to get through. The acting was as great as always. The dialogue had next to no problems. It looked great, better than Volume 1 even. The CGI seemed a little more polished maybe. The sets were absolutely excellent yet again. Regardless, it was fine, enjoyable to sit through, but the fear of this volume being pretty disappointing gnawed at me quite early on, and it was unrelenting. Let's start with the Duffer Brothers' bold proclamation that this show is going to have a high body count. Something that, well, they were as specifically this, but it does seem like they were enjoying highlighting this aspect of the show, so again, this one is kind of on them. Now, Stranger Things has built up a bit of a reputation over time for its inability to kill off main, well-liked characters. Like I said during my Volume 1 rant, so far they've really only killed off Barb, Bob, Alexi, and Billy. All characters were introduced, got no depth, then died, and we haven't given a shit since. Jason actually fits nicely into that group too, and all of them, except for Billy, were even killed off in the season they were introduced. Cut to Eddie Munson, whose death in my mind has marked the death of this show ever being taken seriously again. Well, not quite. I'm being dramatic, but I said before Volume 2 came out that if he was the only one who died in this season, then the show would forever solidify its fate as something incapable of pissing off even a single fan, which in my mind makes the tension in the show absolutely plummet to dangerously low levels. No, not every show needs a character getting killed off to be a constant, genuine threat. Some shows do, however, and I think a horror show where a bunch of little kids and teenagers open up a portal into another world inhabited by mind-controlling demons and superpowered killing machines counts as one of those shows. These are regular kids, and they're routinely battling a stronger and stronger monster with every season, while they themselves only, improve their weaponry from slingshots to bats. There is death and carnage going on around them, so it's not like this world is devoid of the fear of death. If they aim this at a slightly younger audience, or for whatever reasons these otherworldly monsters just didn't often actually kill people, then this wouldn't be a problem. But that obviously just isn't the case. They even tease it non-stop for some reason. In Volume 2, Jason died. What a horrible and boring way to end a not always awful arc that will certainly make the vast majority of people recall him and his storyline very poorly. He even had that great scene in the gun store where he seemed more unhinged and threatening than ever, then they just wasted him. Brenner died. Alright, I like that he died, but the death was not as satisfying as it could have been. While watching, I was hoping he'd carry Elle to the car and then put her in, and when he himself tried to climb in, Elle would tell them not to let him and to drive away without him. Brenner deserved that betrayal, and Elle deserved to really stand up for herself and maybe show that mercy isn't always what people have to do. Or even just what people will do. Could have been really cool, ended up just kinda being lame. The show at times framed him as not completely black, but more gray leaning black, but that guy was a disgusting monster, and a nice satisfying death would have been lovely. It could have been a placeholder for the 11 stands up to her bully once and for all arc until this show finally decides to give the people what they really want. Angela's on-screen death. Someone make this happen, come on. But okay, who else? Max. Max. We all knew Max wasn't gonna die. We knew it in Volume 1 before Kate Bush resurfaced to start collecting her weekly $1 million checks, and we knew it when Vecna trapped Max yet again in Volume 2. When 11 came to save the day, we assumed she was safe. Even as she was raised into the air, we knew Lucas would somehow stop it. Or 11. Or whomever. But then, for the faintest of moments, it seemed as though she really might die. Her limbs snapped, her eyes bled, she collapsed to the ground, and the scene stiffens. I still wasn't convinced, but then she said this.
I'm so scared. I'm so scared.
I know. Please.
I don't want to die. I'm not ready.
You're not gonna die. Please, just hang on.
I want to go on.
I don't want to go.
And I got chills. No one is safe. Vecna is ruthless. The Duffers are unpredictable. Now this is cinema. I don't know what's gonna happen next. But then she's... Wait, she's alive? She's in a coma, yeah, but that expressly isn't death. Oh, but Lucas said the thing. Oh, so she got resurrected. Okay, no, yeah, now I'm really scared for my characters. You can cut the tension with a fucking pool noodle. They were so close to glory. That death would have shaken this series to its core, and all of the deserved praises being slung Sadie Sink's way would have quintupled had she met her demise. But instead, the two new guys die. And so does Brenner, who really, let's face it, at this point, if he came back for another storyline, it would have felt forced and trite and boring, so his death had to be coming sooner or later. They meet a new monster, work to understand it, defeat it, but not permanently, as the promise of the Demogorgon / Mind Flayer / Vecna returning is all but guaranteed. We learn a little bit more about the Upside Down, and the only characters who die are the ones we didn't fall in love with in Season 1, plus Steve and Robin, who have somehow wheeled their way into that list through sheer charm. Sound familiar? I didn't even notice it until I was writing the script, but the show has somehow been secretly recycling material every season since the beginning with only brief signs that a shakeup might be coming. I thought that shakeup might come here. Vecna is easily my favorite villain we've had so far. He had a cool twisty origin, he has a connection to one of our main characters, his design and theme is incredible, but he got beat in the same way as all the others. The theories, as almost always, only serve to heighten the feeling of disappointment when the end credits truly rolled. Most of that is fan-related, so that's not exactly a knock on the show itself. And I know I said earlier that I felt they actually handled things pretty well in Volume 1 given that 1 month gap, not giving us 7,000 potential Easter eggs to the point where if Superman and Master Splinter didn't arrive for the final battle, then things would have felt like a letdown. But I said that when I had higher hopes for this volume and thought they were going to make things a bit more momentous? Climactic? And that is certainly a term I would use to describe that final battle. Anticlimactic. Which isn't always awful for a built-up battle. It can subvert expectations, it can increase the sense of unpredictability, it can set up a greater confrontation down the line. But for the season finale of a show that spent hundreds of millions of dollars and isn't going to be back anytime soon, I do think it needed to be a bit cooler, a bit bigger, maybe bolder and riskier. The kids' admittedly solid plan to take down Vecna more or less goes off without a hitch. Eleven kinda aids in that lack of a hitch, but they don't really know that, nor do they have her in their plans. They got entangled by some vines, got let free, walked up, timed everything really well, killed him while he was still mostly asleep, and it's over. And the Russia plot going on at the same time did make sense to us that they would be doing that to help them, but it's kind of a stretch to think they knew to do that at that exact same time. Kind of felt a lot like they were just trying to force a climax there at the same time for the sake of multiple action sequences going on at once. It all looked cool, just felt a bit emptier than I would have liked. A lot less grandiose, but it's not like it's depressing and hollow in a bleak way because that actually would have been a really cool way to lead up to the final season. I'm kind of just rambling at this point, but that's because I don't want to make this video an hour long and I just have so many points I want to touch on. This volume is kind of tough to review or analyze because a lot of it was pretty good still, it's just weird the discrepancies between the two volumes. Characters that got tons to do in the first one are kind of shoved to the sidelines here. Arcs that we spend a lot of time on just end. One arc still really kills the pacing, but a lot of the interactions are great, a lot of the action is cool, the music and score and editing were all great, a ton of emotional moments landed really well, like Dustin with Eddie's uncle, although Hopper and Els was a little lackluster. Some see Eddie's death as a bit of a shakeup since he was much more of a widespread fan favorite, but I think what really happened is they never planned on Joseph Quinn playing this role so goddamn charming. Just like the others, he got very little depth, very little screen time, an arc that kind of just stopped being important, but we'll give them a bit of a pass on that since circumstances kind of dictated that they had more important things to go take care of. They wrote him to be just like the others, fit with a season-end death, and then Joseph Quinn just absolutely killed it, but they had already written and probably filmed too much to change things. Since we never see his death on screen, I guess it's not the most far-fetched thing in the world to imagine he might come back next season as some part of the Mind Flayer's arsenal. But I really think the only way that ends is with them somehow snapping him loose from the Mind Flayer's hold and then returning the good guys as if his death never happened. And I'm not even saying I hate that idea. I adored his character and they could do something extremely cool with that concept. But if they did, it's gonna take a lot to convince me that that was always their plan and that they didn't just decide to do that after untimely killing off a character they had no idea would end up being so popular. With every season, I just stopped being as excited for this show. It's still good, it's still enjoyable, and it's an absolute cultural phenomenon, so they're doing more than just something right. They're all incredibly charming, and characters like Steve, Dustin, Robin, and Nancy are actually good characters, but I really think the majority of their adoration comes from the actors themselves, namely in the performances. And that does speak to the talent of the show. In season 1, they had a cast of mostly inexperienced 10-year-olds, and they didn't overdirect or micromanage, or even shy away from giving them scenes that typically might be hard for a child actor to pull off. And it's worked out for all of them, cast and staff, so that's extremely commendable. Since then, I just think the charm of the show has been a lot more short-lived. Even after a season like this one, where I thought an argument could easily be made for it being the second best Stranger Things season ever, I don't foresee it sticking around in a lot of non-hardcore fans' minds a few weeks from now. But they have built up a gigantic amount of hardcore fans at this point, so maybe I'm just being far too negative. In conclusion, it's a good show. 2 good volumes, but I think Volume 2 in particular could have and really should have been a lot better. And not just by killing everyone off, but by proving to us that everything they show on screen will end up mattering. The next time we get a Jason-like arc, why are we gonna think that we really need to pay attention? If we get something like Lenora, where immediately the vibe is that we're just killing time before really getting into the good stuff, why are we gonna care about what matters or how the characters are feeling? The next time we're introduced to a new character, do I even have to bother saying it? And to circle back, if someone dies like Hopper kinda did or Max kinda did, why are we ever gonna believe it? I think Stranger Things could benefit from using its time more efficiently and focusing on 1 or 2 main story threads, not 6. Let us really love and care for a few characters, maybe not trying to make us equally love nearly 20. This show was at its best when everything was a lot tighter and snappier and there wasn't any fluff to distract us from the genuinely great stuff happening elsewhere. But okay, in conclusion, let's give these volumes a number score. For Stranger Things Volume 1, I'd give it a solid 8. Maybe an 8 point something if I recently listened to Running Up That Hill or if Steve just gave us a little hair flip or a smirk, but yeah, an 8 regardless. For Volume 2, no, I'm not gonna give it like a 3 or a 2 or something. It was largely pretty fine. A 7 feels too high, a 5 feels way too low. So why don't we just meet somewhere in the middle and we'll give it like a 6.25. What do you mean that's wrong? Well, I said somewhere in the middle, not exactly the middle, so it's fine. No, I'm not gonna look dumb if I keep that in the outro. They know I know numbers. Well, yeah, I guess I'd look kind of dumb if they saw this part right here, but we're not even filming. No, that flashing green light means it's off.